I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Omni viewer, and I'm here to discuss something that was recently posted on Twitter. It's not really a controversy per se, but more of another debate that's popped up surrounding the MonsterVerse. One which is actually very familiar to me because it's something I suggested a few years ago. But anyway, you're probably wondering what it is. So here's what happened. A couple of days ago, that is a couple of days before this video's posting, the Twitter account for Gormaru Island made a post about a desire to see Cthulhu appear in the MonsterVerse, as sort of the ultimate final opponent for Godzilla and Kong to team up against in any potential sequel. And naturally, that sparked a whole bunch of people responding to it. Now, for the most part, the response to this particular tweet hasn't been ugly. Lord knows that given the medium of Twitter, it could have been. But yeah, I've still seen a lot of people disagreeing with the idea that Cthulhu belongs in the MonsterVerse. Now, of course, I suggested that a couple years ago and made my own video about it. Some people have said that I made some pretty glaring errors in that video. I'd have to revisit it and go over what exactly I said and determine whether or not that's actually true. Maybe I did make some mistakes. I'm open to admitting that if I did. But in this particular instance, I'm seeing other people make mistakes in their response to why they don't think Cthulhu belongs in the MonsterVerse. And I feel like they are worth addressing. I'm not calling anyone out specifically, and I'm not attacking anyone, but I do feel that the reasoning I'm seeing expressed the most in terms of why Cthulhu doesn't belong in the MonsterVerse, I just don't feel that it actually holds up to scrutiny. So first of all, it's worth noting that the idea of introducing Cthulhu or a Cthulhu-inspired creature into a kaiju story is not really a new idea. It's been happening for a while now. The tabletop game Monsterpocalypse has a faction called the Lords of Cthulhu, with monsters that are clearly inspired by Cthulhu and his ilk. There's a novel called Cthulhu Kaiju, which is pretty self-explanatory. Speaking of novels, Jeremy Robinson's Project Nemesis series introduces a lot of Lovecraftian elements, including a Cthulhu-type monster named Lovecraft. It's been happening for a while, and quite frankly, there are some Lovecraftian themes already sprinkled into the MonsterVerse. Not to such an overt extent that I would say that it is the adaptation of the Cthulhu mythos we've been waiting for. It's not full-blown cosmic horror, but it does still have that sort of undercurrent. The idea that you have these beings that are billions of years old and so much greater than humanity could ever hope to be. One of which at least comes from outer space and is a destroyer with a bizarre biology. There is that undercurrent. It's more in line with what August Derleth wrote for the Cthulhu mythos, as opposed to what Lovecraft wrote. But then again, August Derleth is really the reason Lovecraft's work survived into the modern day at all. So, say what you want about his contributions to the mythos proper, I don't think we can write him off completely because he's the guy who kept the work alive. Now, of course, the counter-argument is that a parody or homage to Cthulhu is not the same as the literal Cthulhu. Okay, fair enough point. But what exactly is the literal Cthulhu? One reason I've seen given for why the Great Old Ones couldn't fit into the MonsterVerse is because so far the MonsterVerse has not presented any idea that there are alternate dimensions, or creatures that can exist in the space between spaces, or that operate on a different matter field than what we do. And that's not technically a wrong observation to make. It's correct. The MonsterVerse hasn't introduced any of that. But where are people getting that from? Based on my own observations, they're getting it from later works of the Cthulhu mythos. Things that were done by other authors. They're not getting it from the original stories. You read the original stories, and yes, the Great Old Ones, the Migo, the Shoggoths, all of those creatures, they operate by different rules than humanity and other creatures of Earth. But that doesn't mean they don't act within the reality of our universe. And that's the thing, they do exist within our universe. Azathoth swirls around in a maelstrom at the center of our universe. Cthulhu is physically entombed on Earth. The Migo fly between the stars in our version of space. It's all set on Earth. There are no alternate dimensions. There are no other realities. There are certainly ways that reality can be bent to the Great Old One's will. And you do have the dreamscape. But the dreamscape is looking more into the realm of Carl Jung's collective unconscious, which is something that people are at least willing to give some credence to even today. And in terms of bending reality, I mean, heck, science fiction does that all the time anyway. But the whole idea that you can't introduce Lovecraftian creatures without introducing bizarre physics and bizarre otherworldly alternate dimensions and whatnot, that's not necessarily true to the original stories. In fact, reinforcing the idea that the Great Old Ones are more physical beings than most people perceive them to be, and might in fact actually qualify as kaiju, are the works of Robert E. Howard. Not many people knew this for a very long time because editors usually cut them out of the reprints, but the works of Conan the Barbarian, those stories that Howard wrote, they're part of the Cthulhu mythos. And Lovecraft was 100% behind it, so everything in those stories had Lovecraft's approval. They are officially part of the Cthulhu mythos, as far as most people are concerned. And whenever they show up in the Conan stories, they are still described as powerful godlike beings, but they're the kind of beings that you can still technically beat back. You can divert them, you can send them running. The thing is, it just takes an extreme amount of effort to do, an effort which most people simply cannot muster on their own. And we see that reflected in Kaiju Eiga quite often. Look at the original Godzilla. How did they get rid of Godzilla eventually? They had to come up with something more destructive than Godzilla, and they didn't come away with a clean victory. You can sort of see that as a reflection of that aspect of the Cthulhu mythos. But then we have the real doozy. The argument which, well, let me just state it outright for you. The main argument for why Cthulhu should not be in the MonsterVerse is because Cthulhu is not a kaiju. He is not just a big monster. Even though he is a monster by our standards, and he is big by our standards, he is more than just a big monster. Now, technically speaking, I agree with that sentiment 100%. Cthulhu is more than just a big monster. Here's the thing though, that's the exact same argument that I've made about the likes of Godzilla, King Kong, Gamera, Ultraman, King Ghidorah, Mothra, Gilvalis, Zeton, all the best of the giant monsters. They are more than just big monsters. Look, if we were talking about introducing Cthulhu into a universe that was comprised of things like the big ants from Them, or the huge octopus from It Came From Beneath the Sea, or the brutish dinosaurs from the Land Unknown, then you'd have a point. Then you could say Cthulhu is more than just a big, brutish monster that mindlessly destroys stuff like those things do. But we're not talking about those creatures. We're talking about these creatures. We're talking about creatures that are characters, that have their own personalities, their own motivations. their own thought processes, which are bizarre and, for lack of a better word, alien to humanity, and yet we can still agree that they are thinking, feeling creatures, like Cthulhu. And in fact, the term kaiju has been applied to such a vast variety of creatures. Anything from an unusually large dinosaur like Gorosaurus to a literal deity like Mothra or King Caesar. There's a huge group of creatures that you can identify as kaiju, terrestrial or extraterrestrial, natural or supernatural, mutant or science experiment. The Frankenstein monster became a kaiju at one point, people. Heck, the term kaiju doesn't even mean giant monster. It means literally strange beast. And what beast is stranger than Cthulhu? Personally, I stand by the idea of Cthulhu being a kaiju not because he's a big monster, but because, like the iconic kaiju that we all know and love, he has just the right combination of recognizable design and distinct personality. That puts him in good company if you count him as a kaiju. Again, I wouldn't equate him to just the big animals of the 1950s movies. He's not just a giant spider. He's not just a dinosaur that's hunting. He is more than that. But so is Godzilla. So is King Kong. So are so many of the great kaiju, which of course would be headlining any future MonsterVerse movies. So quite frankly, why not put Cthulhu in the MonsterVerse? Or at least something that could serve as an allegory for Cthulhu. So I'm with Gormaro Island on this one. I've said before that I want to see Cthulhu in the MonsterVerse, and I still do. I think it could work. We'll see what happens, of course. I don't know what the plan is going forward. I don't know if it's going to be Son of Kong, Godzilla BC, or something totally new that has nothing to do with either Godzilla or Kong. But whatever it is, I do think that Cthulhu could fit in somehow. All we have to do is try. But that's just where I stand on the matter. And I'm sure you have a place where you stand as well, so you know the drill. Comment down below. See what people think. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books, Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.